I went to the garage for a simple car fix, but her sister showed up, and nothing would ever be the same. The late afternoon sun cast a warm, golden glow across the quiet streets as I steered my car into the small, almost hidden garage at the corner of the block. My engine had been making that persistent, nerve-wracking rattle all morning, and I knew I couldn't put it off any longer. I wasn't expecting anything extraordinary, just a quick fix and the usual exchange of money and politeness. The garage smelled of oil, rubber, and the faint tang of gasoline, a strangely comforting aroma that always reminded me of steady, quiet work. Tools lined the walls in an organized chaos, each with its own place, worn handles telling stories of hands that had used them for decades. I stepped out of the car, stretching my shoulders, and caught sight of her. She was leaning over a car on the other side of the garage, hands skillfully maneuvering a wrench, her posture relaxed but purposeful. There was something graceful about the way she moved, an ease that spoke of years of experience. Her hair, pulled into a loose knot, had a few strands escaping to frame her face, softening her strong, confident features. I felt my chest tighten slightly, almost by surprise at the sight of her. Not just her beauty, but the quiet authority she carried. She was older, unquestionably so, but the way she held herself made age irrelevant. As I approached, she looked up, and our eyes met. There was a spark of curiosity in her gaze, but it wasn't intrusive. It was welcoming, as if she had sensed I was nervous and wanted to put me at ease. "Hi," I said, my voice a little rougher than usual. She responded with a smile that was both professional and unexpectedly warm, a small curve of lips that made the corners of my chest feel lighter. She handed me a clipboard, and our hands brushed lightly, an almost imperceptible touch, yet enough to make me notice the warmth of her skin, the subtle steadiness of her fingers. I felt a flicker of something I couldn't quite name, a quiet flutter that made me acutely aware of her presence. I quickly diverted my gaze, pretending to examine the form, but I couldn't help noticing how her eyes followed me with that same gentle attentiveness, as if she could read the faint tension in my shoulders. Her voice was calm, measured, with a soft timbre that carried easily over the clatter of distant tools. When she explained what she thought might be wrong with the car, I found myself listening, not just to her words, but to the cadence, the little inflections, the way she leaned slightly forward when emphasizing a point. There was an ease in her movement, a natural rhythm that drew my attention in a way that was both grounding and electrifying. As she returned to the car, I lingered for a moment, pretending to check my phone, but really just watching her work. There was an intimacy in the simplicity of the scene, the subtle sway of her shoulders as she bent over the engine, the faint scent of her perfume mingling with the grease and oil, a quiet contradiction that somehow fit her perfectly. My heart felt lighter, my thoughts tangled with curiosity and admiration. In that ordinary garage, a moment of extraordinary tension was quietly unfolding, and I hadn't even realized how completely I had noticed her. By the time she straightened up and met my gaze again, there was a shared, silent acknowledgement of this unexpected connection. A moment that promised, almost imperceptibly, that my visit to the garage would be far from ordinary. I leaned against the edge of the garage, pretending to scroll through my phone, but really, I was watching her work. There was a rhythm to her movements, almost meditative. The way she adjusted a wrench, the precise motion of her hands, the subtle exhale as she checked the alignment of a part. Every detail felt deliberate, effortless, yet somehow intimate, as if I were witnessing a quiet ritual I had stumbled upon. When she noticed me lingering, she tilted her head slightly, the faintest smile playing at her lips. "You've got to be careful leaning there. You might get oil on your jacket," she said, her voice soft but teasing, carrying just the right hint of warmth. I chuckled, a little self-conscious, and stepped back. Yet, when our hands brushed briefly as she handed me a rag to clean up a small spill, I felt a gentle spark, a fleeting warmth that lingered far longer than the touch itself. As she worked, she began explaining the problem in a way that was both informative and oddly comforting. She didn't just list technical terms. She walked me through it, making sure I understood, using simple analogies that brought the car, and strangely, the moment, alive. I found myself listening intently, drawn not only to her expertise but to the tone of her voice, the subtle way she emphasized certain words, the careful pauses that made her seem both thoughtful and considerate. At one point, a stubborn bolt refused to budge. She sighed, a soft, almost private sound, and I instinctively stepped closer. "Need a hand?" I offered, trying to sound casual, but my heart was racing in a way I didn't expect. She glanced up, those confident eyes locking with mine, and for a moment, the garage seemed to shrink, the hum of distant machinery fading into a quiet bubble around us. "Thanks," she said simply, handing me the wrench. Our fingers brushed again, this time more deliberately, and I noticed the subtle heat in her hand, the strength beneath her delicate movements. As I worked alongside her, passing tools, tightening bolts under her direction, there was an unexpected intimacy in the shared focus. The garage smelled faintly of grease and metal, mingled with the softer hint of her perfume, subtle but lingering. Every time our shoulders bumped, even accidentally, I felt a brief, electric awareness of her presence, a quiet tension that wasn't uncomfortable but entirely consuming. We fell into a rhythm together, almost wordless at times, communicating through glances, gestures, the shared understanding of the task at hand. I realized that it wasn't just her skill that captivated me. It was her steadiness, the quiet confidence that made me feel both calm and unusually alert at the same time. In those moments, my mind wandered to thoughts I hadn't intended to have, imagining her laugh outside this garage, imagining conversations that might extend beyond engines and bolts. By the time the work slowed, and she wiped her hands on a rag, brushing a smudge of grease from her cheek, I felt a surprising sense of connection. It wasn't romantic yet, not in the overt sense, but there was a subtle shift, a warmth in the shared space, a quiet acknowledgement that this encounter had become something far more charged than a simple car repair. I had come for a quick fix, but what I found was a first glimpse of something extraordinary, delicate, and entirely unexpected. Just as the car hummed steadily under her careful adjustments, I felt the subtle shift in the air, the kind that makes you sense something is about to change, though you don't yet know what. The garage door rattled, and a breeze carrying the faint scent of jasmine and fresh detergent swept in. She looked up from the engine, frowning slightly, and I followed her gaze. Standing in the doorway was her sister, younger, lively, and radiating a playful energy that contrasted sharply with the mechanic's composed calm. She leaned casually against the frame, arms crossed, a teasing smile curling at the edges of her lips. "Well, isn't this cozy?" she said, her tone lilting with amusement. Immediately, the warm, steady rhythm that had settled in the garage felt a little off-kilter, as if someone had thrown a pebble into a still pond. The moment our eyes met, I felt my chest tighten. There was something magnetic about her too, less polished than her sister, more spontaneous, but the heat in her gaze was undeniable. She stepped in, her shoes scuffing lightly against the concrete, carrying an air of confidence that made my thoughts stumble over themselves. Every gesture was deliberate, yet casual. A playful lean here, a subtle tilt of the head there. I noticed the way her hair caught the light, the curve of her smile as she surveyed me with mild amusement, and I felt an almost embarrassing awareness of my own reactions. Her sister, the mechanic, didn't flinch. Instead, she shot her a look that was part exasperation, part warning, as if silently communicating, "Don't make this harder for him." I couldn't help but notice the way her presence shifted the dynamic in the garage, creating a delicate tension that was as thrilling as it was confusing. As the younger sister approached, she crouched slightly to inspect the car, giving the pretense of curiosity while subtly leaning closer than necessary. Our hands brushed lightly as I handed her a tool, a fleeting touch that sent a small shiver through me. She looked up with a grin, holding my gaze a moment longer than politeness required, and I realized just how aware I was of her proximity. The warmth of her shoulder, the faint scent of her perfume, the playful sparkle in her eyes. She teased me gently about my expertise with cars, her words laced with humor and a hint of mischief. I laughed, though my voice felt tight, betraying the strange mixture of flustered embarrassment and sudden intrigue. Meanwhile, the mechanic continued her work, her movements precise and deliberate, occasionally glancing at us with a small, almost imperceptible smile, as if she knew exactly the effect this would have on me. For a moment, the garage felt smaller, charged with a silent electricity. I realized I was navigating uncharted territory, caught between the composed warmth of the woman fixing my car and the playful, teasing energy of her sister. Both were captivating in completely different ways, and both demanded attention without saying a word. My mind raced, awareness heightened, as I tried to maintain balance. Polite, respectful, yet unable to ignore the subtle pull from each of them. By the time she finally straightened, brushing a stray lock of hair from her face, the tension had woven itself into a delicate, intoxicating web. The air was thick with possibility, quiet laughter, and unspoken attraction. The ordinary garage, once just a place for a car repair, had transformed into a space charged with quiet anticipation. And I knew, deep down, that this visit was no longer about the car at all. The garage had shifted into a strange kind of tension. The younger sister's playful energy lingered in the air, bouncing off the walls and keeping me hyper-aware of every movement. Meanwhile, the mechanic moved with her usual quiet precision, but I noticed small, deliberate gestures, slight touches, meaningful glances, that seemed almost like gentle reminders of her presence. The interplay between the two women created a delicate rivalry I wasn't sure how to navigate. As the younger sister leaned over the car to inspect the engine again, brushing past me lightly, I felt the warmth of her shoulder against mine. The contact was fleeting, yet it left an unexpected shiver trailing down my spine. I stepped back subtly, aware of my own quickened heartbeat, and caught her teasing smile out of the corner of my eye. Her glance was mischievous, full of unspoken challenges, as if daring me to respond, but I wasn't sure how. The mechanic, in contrast, maintained her composed air, her attention on the car yet mindful of every subtle interaction. When she passed me a wrench, her hand briefly grazed mine, and I felt a quiet steadiness that contrasted sharply with the playful electricity her sister brought. It was almost dizzying, the push and pull between calm assurance and teasing unpredictability. My mind raced with awareness of every accidental touch, every brush of hands, every lingering look. I found myself hesitating, unsure where to place my attention. Should I respond to the playful energy of the younger sister, her teasing making me laugh and stumble over my words? Or should I focus on the quiet, thoughtful presence of the mechanic, whose calm attention made me feel unexpectedly grounded? Every glance, every movement seemed to carry meaning, and I was hyper-aware of how I appeared in the midst of it all. Even the smallest gestures felt charged. When the younger sister leaned over to point out a detail in the engine, our hands brushed again, fingers tangling for a brief moment. I felt my pulse spike, and my gaze flickered instinctively toward the mechanic. She caught my look, her eyes calm and knowing, almost silently reminding me of the subtle rules of this interaction. Respect, awareness, patience. I felt caught in the middle, my own emotions a mix of admiration, attraction, and hesitation. There was humor, too, in the situation. The sisters shared quiet, knowing glances, a shared understanding that this dynamic was unfolding in front of me. I noticed the mechanic's small, playful smiles, the sisters' teasing glances, and realized that neither of them was unaware of the effect they were having. Each gesture, each touch, each fleeting moment carried unspoken meaning, drawing me deeper into the quiet tension of the space. By the time the work slowed for a short break, I felt emotionally stretched in multiple directions. I was drawn to the steady warmth of the mechanic, yet charmed and teased by the lively attention of her sister. The garage, once just a place of work, had become a stage for subtle emotional play, and I was acutely aware of every glance, every touch, every laugh. I realized, with a mixture of exhilaration and hesitation, that the day had become far more complicated and far more compelling than I could have imagined. The garage had quieted down. The car hummed softly under its own weight as the sisters stepped back for a brief pause, leaving me alone with the mechanic for just a moment. It was in that fleeting silence that something shifted, an unspoken invitation to step closer, emotionally and physically, without the playful interference of her sister. She leaned lightly against the car, the soft hum of the engine mixing with the distant sounds of traffic outside. "You know," she began, her voice unusually soft, "sometimes it's easy to get caught up in the mechanical side of things and forget there's more to life than fixing what's broken." Her gaze met mine, steady and deliberate, and I felt a pull I couldn't quite explain. There was warmth in her eyes, but also a vulnerability she didn't often reveal. I shifted closer, instinctively aware of the small space between us. The faint scent of her perfume lingered, mingling with the garage's familiar scent of oil and metal, creating an oddly intimate cocoon. When she spoke again, I noticed the small movements, the way her fingers brushed a loose strand of hair from her face, the subtle tilt of her shoulder as she leaned slightly toward me, the soft exhale that carried just a hint of nerves. "I don't usually open up like this," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. There was no pressure, no rush, just the quiet honesty of someone sharing a piece of themselves. I felt a strange sense of privilege, being the one she had chosen to confide in, and it stirred a protective, tender side of me I hadn't anticipated. I nodded, encouraging her without words, letting her feel the space to continue. She spoke of past challenges, small regrets, and moments of quiet longing, the kind of stories that reveal character without needing to flaunt it. As she talked, I realized the depth of her emotional intelligence, the grace with which she carried both her strength and her vulnerabilities. Her words were like soft music, filling the small garage, making the ordinary space feel charged with quiet significance. When she reached for a rag to wipe her hands, our fingers brushed lightly. The contact was brief but electric. I noticed the subtle warmth of her skin, the strength in her grip, and the way she seemed entirely aware of the impact a simple touch could have. My heartbeat quickened, and I felt the weight of unspoken words hovering between us. For a moment we just stood there, letting silence speak. The tension was not anxious or uncomfortable. It was the delicate pause of two people recognizing the possibility of something more, something profound, without rushing it. Her presence was grounding, steady, yet there was a quiet thrill in the intimacy of being this close, emotionally and physically. As she finally smiled, a small, genuine curve of her lips, I felt the tension ease slightly. It wasn't a resolution, not yet, but it was a promise. That connection, understanding, and mutual curiosity were beginning to bloom. In that ordinary garage, amid grease, tools, and the hum of an engine, something extraordinary had begun. An emotional intimacy neither of us could ignore, quietly building towards something neither of us had fully anticipated. The quiet intimacy I had just experienced with the mechanic was abruptly, and delightfully, interrupted by her sister. She returned from a quick errand, leaning casually against the doorway, her energy lighting up the garage like a playful spark. Her grin was mischievous, eyes glinting with that same teasing charm she had used earlier. It was clear she had noticed the subtle shift between the mechanic and me, and she seemed determined to stir the pot just enough to make it fun. "Need a hand? Or are you two just enjoying the quiet?" she asked, her voice light and teasing, walking toward us with a purposeful swagger. I felt a flicker of heat rise in my chest at the playful tone. Her words weren't intrusive. They were a challenge, a gentle nudge into the unspoken emotional tension that had been simmering all afternoon. As she leaned over the car to inspect a part, our hands brushed once again. The contact was accidental, she claimed, but there was a deliberate spark in the way she lingered just long enough to make me hyper-aware of her presence. The warmth of her skin, the closeness of her shoulder to mine, and the soft scent of her perfume mixed with the oil and grease. It was intoxicating. I could feel my pulse quicken in ways I hadn't anticipated. Meanwhile, the mechanic observed from a few feet away, her eyes calm but attentive, almost knowing. There was no jealousy in her gaze, only a quiet confidence, an awareness of the bond forming, and perhaps even a sense of amusement. She leaned against the car, arms crossed lightly, and watched the interaction unfold with an understated elegance, the corner of her mouth curling into a subtle smile. The younger sister laughed, a musical, teasing sound that echoed in the garage. She picked up a small tool and, pretending to fumble, nudged it toward me, and our hands collided. She leaned closer under the pretense of checking a measurement, and I couldn't help but notice the warmth radiating from her. Her proximity made my thoughts scatter, caught between admiration, nervousness, and a growing awareness of attraction. At that moment, something shifted. I realized how different and complementary the two women were. The mechanic's calm, grounding presence made my chest feel steady, while her sister's lively, teasing energy made it race. And yet, in the midst of this playful chaos, there was a balance. Their shared smiles and knowing glances suggested an unspoken understanding between them, a subtle communication that somehow included me in its quiet circle. I laughed nervously, brushing off the lingering tension as the younger sister straightened, her eyes locking briefly with mine in a moment of silent acknowledgement. There was a spark, a hint of something unspoken, that made me realize just how emotionally charged this encounter had become. What started as a simple car repair had transformed into a delicate dance of connection, playfulness, and attraction. An intricate web of feelings that I was only beginning to understand. By the time she finally stepped back, the air in the garage was warm, vibrant, and charged with possibility. The playful twist had done its work. I was acutely aware of my feelings, the subtle rivalry between the sisters, and the realization that this moment, messy, chaotic, and exhilarating, was one I would remember far longer than the hum of any engine or the smell of grease. The car purred smoothly now, a soft testament to the mechanic's skill. Yet the true transformation had occurred in the air around it. The garage, once a place of ordinary repairs and scattered tools, now felt alive with warmth, laughter, and quiet, unspoken emotion. The playful tension from earlier had softened into something tender, a delicate rhythm of connection that neither of us had expected when I first rolled in for a quick fix. The younger sister leaned casually on the hood of the car, her mischievous energy now tempered by a gentle smile. She nudged me lightly with her elbow, as if sharing an inside joke that only the three of us could understand. Her eyes sparkled with amusement, but there was a softness there now, a quiet acknowledgement of the bond forming between us. I felt my pulse settle, my mind clearing just enough to savor the moment without panic or hesitation. Meanwhile, the mechanic stood close, arms relaxed at her sides, exuding the quiet strength that had drawn me in from the start. When she caught my gaze, there was a warmth in her eyes, a steady, grounding presence that seemed to whisper, "It's okay. You're safe here." She smiled, a small, genuine curl of her lips, and for the first time that afternoon, I felt the full weight of the connection we'd built. Her calm had been the anchor, her confidence the steadying force in the midst of playful chaos. We moved closer together, an unspoken choreography of comfort and respect. The younger sister offered her hand first, and I shook it lightly, laughing at the lingering warmth of her grip. The mechanic's hand brushed mine in turn, brief but charged, leaving a quiet heat lingering on my skin. It wasn't about grand gestures or declarations. It was about presence, attention, and the subtle, tender acknowledgement of one another. We shared a small, quiet moment together, leaning slightly against the car, the late afternoon sunlight streaming through the open garage door. It fell in soft, golden streaks across our faces, illuminating expressions of amusement, curiosity, and connection. The hum of the engine faded into the background as our conversation flowed, light, easy, and full of those small touches and gestures that made the ordinary extraordinary. A hand on a shoulder, a brief brush of fingers, a shared glance, all conveying a depth of feeling words could not fully capture. By the time we finally stepped back, ready to leave the garage, there was a shared sense of warmth and understanding. The sisters walked beside me, laughing softly, their playful energy harmonizing rather than competing. The mechanic placed a hand lightly on my arm in farewell, a lingering touch that spoke of respect, curiosity, and the quiet promise of more to come. The younger sister nudged me gently, her grin still mischievous but affectionate, signaling that whatever had begun here was far from over, but perfectly balanced, tender, and safe. As I drove away, the scent of oil and gasoline lingering faintly in the car, I felt a deep sense of satisfaction. What had started as a simple car repair had blossomed into something far richer. A web of connection, quiet desire, and emotional intimacy that left me both exhilarated and grounded. The tension, playfulness, and warmth of the garage had woven together seamlessly, leaving a memory that would linger long after the engine's hum faded into the distance. In that ordinary place, surrounded by tools and sunlight, something extraordinary had taken root. An age-gap romance, slow-burning and tender, built on respect, affection, and the quiet thrill of connection. And I knew, as I drove down the street, that this was only the beginning of a story I would never forget. If you enjoyed this slow-burn story of unexpected connections and tender romance, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more heartwarming age-gap love stories. Comment below. Who did you feel more drawn to, the mechanic or her sister? Your thoughts make these stories even more special.